What's up everybody, and thank you for all your support so far. It's been really awesome seeing the comments and questions and people subscribing, and just a lot of enthusiasm and excitement around this project, so thank you for that. I'm really looking forward to this year. So what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about my plan for the year and how I intend to learn Japanese. So I'm going to give a brief overview of my rough schedule, the rough schedule that I have in mind, as well as some of the resources that I plan on using. So first of all, we need to define the goal. I've said that I want to reach basic fluency and basic literacy by the end of the year. More specifically, I'd like to hit somewhere in the range of a B2 level on the European language level system. So this European language level system has A levels, which are like the beginner levels, B, which are intermediate, and C levels, which are advanced. I'm aiming for B2, which is an upper intermediate level, and this is the first level that they consider to be fluent. So let me read the definition of that from Wikipedia here. 1. Can understand the main ideas of complex text on both concrete and abstract topics, including technical discussions in their field of specialization. Okay, so can understand the main ideas of complex text. This does not necessarily mean that I know everything. I'm not perfect, but I'm getting the main idea, I'm getting the gist of the idea, and in fact a little bit more. So I should understand what a text is about, and the few words that I don't know aren't going to trip me up too much. Second, can interact with a degree of fluency and spontaneity that makes regular interaction with native speakers quite possible without strain for either party. Okay, so again, this is a degree of fluency and spontaneity. This is not completely perfect, but by this point I should have enough command over the language to keep up the flow of a conversation, and when I come across a word that I want to say but I don't know, I should have enough control to describe it in another way, to kind of dance around these words that I don't know. For example, if we're talking about an obscure word like driveway, okay, which I'm not going to learn driveway in the first year of Japanese learning because I have much higher priorities. But let's say I want to tell my friend that I parked the car in the driveway. And I don't know the word for driveway, so instead I just say, I left the car in front of the house. That conveys the exact same meaning, and it uses, I would be able to put that phrase together without a problem, and I would know all that vocabulary. So that's what I'm looking for, is that I'm able to keep up the flow of the conversation, make it feel natural, and even though I won't know all of the words that I would say in English, I'm able to describe things in another way so that the other person wouldn't really even notice. Finally, B2 says that one can produce clear and detailed text on a wide range of subjects and explain a viewpoint on a topical issue, giving the advantages and disadvantages of various options. So this requires a somewhat advanced command over the written language, which in Japanese poses some extra challenges. However, when you're writing things, you do have a little bit more time to organize your thoughts, to edit yourself, to do these kinds of things that you can't do while you're speaking. So I think that it's not unreasonable to attain this level within a year. There's also a Japanese rating system which doesn't correlate exactly with this. Based on the definitions that I've read, it seems to me that it would be somewhere in between N3 and N2, N2 being the more advanced one. And I think that B2 is closer to N2. However, I do think that the N2 level on the Japanese scale is a little bit higher. For example, a lot of well-known language learners speak about the B2 level being where you're socially comfortable, but you're still having a little bit of trouble with some things like the news, where the news would be like a higher register of speaking, a little bit more academic vocabulary, and generally very fast also. And in the case of the Japanese N2 level, the more advanced one, they are basically saying you should be able to understand news programs without a problem. So based on examples like that, it seems to me that N2 is a little bit higher. But in any case, I am not very interested in the tests themselves. I'm much more interested in just how I use the language in my life. So at the end of the day, I want to be having good conversations by the end of the year. I don't expect to be perfect or anything close to it, but I should be able to kind of keep up the flow of a conversation and describe my way around words I might not know. And then I'd like to be able to read some Japanese. I'd like to be able to kind of get by in Japan and hopefully be reading some articles and stuff like that in Japanese. So with the definitions out of the way, let's jump into the schedule. So first of all, to do all of this, to reach a level of like B2 in Japanese in 1 year is not a lot of time, and it's going to be kind of intense. So I have to give this warning if you're following along and plan on learning stuff at the same time. I'm going to have a pretty intense workload. I mean, less than full-time, but it's going to be enough to probably stop me from having other hobbies this year. So if you want to do something a little more pleasurable or casual, take 2 or 3 years and do this, because this is a big language. I mean, there's a lot of information that you have to get into your head, and it takes time. That being said, I tend to enjoy focusing on one thing at a time and getting super deep with it. So for me, the idea of doing Japanese a little bit more intensely for a shorter period of time is attractive. So that's what I'm going to do. But I'm going to need to be very smart about how I do it. Otherwise, I'm not going to hit the deadline. So one of the main resources that I'm going to be using is a book called Fluent Forever by Gabriel Weiner. And you'll probably hear me talk about this, especially with the resources at the beginning, because they also provide some great resources for pronunciation and some word lists for beginners. But this book is a great guide for how to learn any language, and I haven't found anything that works as fast or as effectively as this. So that's going to be my kind of core, not curriculum, but my core guideline for how to learn a language. And then I'm going to have a handful of other resources for vocabulary, grammar, conversation practice, stuff like that. Day one, the very first thing that I need to do is pronunciation. I need to familiarize myself with the sound system of Japanese. And there's 2 parts to this. One is training my ears to properly hear the sounds of Japanese. And 2 is training my mouth to make those sounds. But they have to go in that order. I have to train my ears first before I have a chance of properly producing the sounds. So I'm going to be training my ears primarily through something called minimal pair testing. And minimal pairs are pairs of words that sound exactly the same except for one sound. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details of the research, but it's one of the most effective ways to train your ears to hear new sounds. So for example, if you were a native Japanese speaker trying to learn English, it would be very helpful for you to learn to distinguish between rock and lock, because in Japanese you don't have the exact same R and L distinction that we do in English. Same thing goes for an English speaker learning French. You have to learn the difference between tu and tu. And there's lots of examples like this in any language. So I'm going to be training my ears through Japanese minimal pairs, as well as pairs of Japanese and English words that compare the subtle differences between similar sounds in Japanese and English. So once I've trained myself to properly hear the sounds of Japanese, I can start to learn how to produce those sounds. And having that previous training, I'm going to have a much better chance of, correcting myself and hearing when I make a mistake. So, by the way, this is all before I learn a single word in Japanese. It's really important that I get the sound down first. And there's a lot of advantages to doing this. A lot of people tend to sort of not worry about the accent and sort of put it off till later. They say, well, let me learn the language first, and then, one day I'll clean up my accent. The problem is that doesn't really work very well, because by the time you've spent 6 months or a year or more on a language, you've already built up a lot of bad habits, like muscularly speaking, and it's really difficult to break those habits after a long time. So it's better to build good habits at the beginning. This also has the advantage of improving my oral comprehension from the beginning, as well as increasing my vocabulary retention. Because if I can't hear the sounds properly, I'm going to have a really hard time remembering the words. I'll be learning the pronunciation primarily through a pronunciation trainer created by the people at Fluent Forever. These are really awesome tools. They're inexpensive and very well put together. Basically, it teaches you all the sounds of a language and all the spelling rules, and it's generally one of the first things I do when learning a new language. The second thing I'll be doing is learning the basics of the writing system in Japanese. Japanese has 3 writing systems. 2 of them are relatively simple. These are hiragana and katakana, and these are phonetic alphabets which function exactly like our alphabet, meaning that each symbol corresponds to a sound, but the symbol doesn't actually have any kind of meaning unless you combine it with other symbols to make it work. These are going to be easy to learn, so I'm going to learn that right at the beginning. The third writing system in Japanese, kanji, is by far the most complex. And these are the characters originally derived from Chinese that make up the bulk of what you need to read in Japanese. So kanji are logograms, and logograms are symbols that mean something, as opposed to our alphabet that sounds like something. So when you see a kanji character, there's an inherent meaning to that, and unfortunately it doesn't actually tell you anything about how to pronounce it. And in some cases there are multiple ways to pronounce a particular character. And on top of that, there might be 2 or 3 characters that you need to spell one single word. And then on top of that, each individual character can have dozens of strokes and be extremely complex. So this one thing accounts for a very big percentage of the difficulty involved with Japanese, is just this writing system. I've chosen to start learning the reading and writing system of Japanese from the very beginning. This is going to slow down my progress at the beginning, but allow me to progress more quickly later on. The reason for that is it'll allow me to get to using Japanese resources sooner, and it'll also prevent me from hitting a plateau or a wall later on where I've learned the language to a certain point and now I have to relearn how to read and write all of that. So it should be relatively simple to learn hiragana and katakana, since they're basically just like learning a new alphabet. Kanji, on the other hand, is going to be quite a bit more complex. And the way I intend to start is by learning what's known as radicals. So radicals are smaller bits that when you combine them in various combinations and positions make up all of the rest of the kanji characters. My first task with kanji is to familiarize myself with the 50 most frequently used radicals. It's about 25% of the total radicals, but account for 75% of all kanji needed for Japanese literacy when you combine them in various positions and combinations. To learn these radicals, I'm going to be using another tool, again from the people at Fluent Forever. This one is actually free though. And basically the idea is for each of these symbols to attach a very vivid, concrete image to each of these. Ideally that image should correspond to the meaning of that radical if it has one. And if not, it should correspond to the shape of the character itself. And so then the idea is, once you've accumulated a knowledge of these radicals, when you see a new kanji character, you're seeing familiar bits rearranged in a new way, instead of one new giant big scary thing. So let's recap up to this point. First, I'm going to learn pronunciation, which involves training my ears and then training my mouth. Then I'm going to learn the basics of the writing system, which means learning hiragana and katakana and the most frequently used kanji radicals. Once I've done all of this, which I expect to take 2 to 3 weeks, I'm ready to learn vocabulary. So now we begin phase 2, which is vocabulary. and I want to avoid translation as much as possible and have something closer to an immersion experience. So instead of attaching English words to Japanese words, I'd rather attach Japanese words to the idea or the concept itself. And that way I can start to think in the language from the very beginning. In order to do that, the very first words that I learn are all simple words that I can learn using pictures. So this is stuff like run, eat, mom, dog, green, things that I need to know but are simple enough to be conveyed in an image, and that way I can avoid translation entirely. And again, the people at Fluent Forever have put together word lists in a lot of languages, including Japanese, that contain about 600 of these words. And if you have the book, you already have that list in English, but I find that the word lists that they sell are also very useful because they organize them with the pronunciations, and it's got a nice order to learn the words in, and there's notes about usage and stuff. So at this point, I'm going to start learning these 600 or so words using the flashcard program Anki. Now, I'll get more into the details of that when I'm actually doing it, but if you want to get a head start, I'm going to link to some videos that you can check out as far as getting Anki ready to go for Japanese. Learning these first 625 words is going to take a little bit longer in Japanese than it would for me in another language, because in Japanese there's so much more information per word that I have to learn. So I have the kana spellings, the pronunciation, the kanji. In some cases I'm going to be learning new radicals that go with those kanji, and yeah, it's just a lot of stuff, so it's going to take some time. But still, I hope that I can finish that within 3 months. So that's the goal. And at some point during those 3 months, I intend to start playing around with sentences also. Meaning I'll be taking some of these nouns and verbs and stuff that I've learned in isolation and start throwing them into sentences and playing around with the grammar in a very basic way. And I'll be doing that with the help of a tutor or tutors on the website italki.com. Italki is a great resource to find free or very cheap conversation partners in any language, so I'm going to be using that a lot this year for Japanese. Once I've learned the first 625 words, my next task is to learn the first 1,000 words in Japanese, meaning the most frequently used 1,000 words. So these are super important, and I'm going to get a lot of mileage out of them because these 1,000 words alone account for around 75% of the language. At this point, I'm going to have a base vocabulary of a lot of common Japanese words already that I learned with pictures, and so now I'm ready to start learning more abstract terms by using Japanese definitions and fill-in-the-blank sentences. And again, this allows me to avoid translation and just keep thinking in Japanese. And the more that I can think in Japanese, the better. As I learn these top 1,000 words, I'll continue to expand my knowledge of grammar through the help of a tutor and some grammar books as well. For those of you wondering, I haven't actually chosen which one I'm going to use yet, but I've heard great things about the Genki series, as well as Colloquial Japanese and a few others. But I will be making a decision on that later on once I'm a little bit more familiar with what my needs are. Generally, what I would do immediately after having learned the first 1,000 words is to really focus on grammar and clean up a lot of my mistakes, because at this point I'll have 75% of the vocab of the whole language, and now it's time to start learning how to control that vocab through grammar. So I find that if I know the first 1,000 words of any language, and I have good command over that language through the grammar, that I can generally function at around a B1 level. And that's what I hope to do in Japanese at this point. So that all brings us to an important mark in the year, and an important deadline that I'd like to hit, which is halfway through the year. So after 6 months, I would like to have learned the top 1,000 words in the language. Some of those will be covered already by the 600 I learned before that with images, but some won't. And at this point, I want to have a somewhat decent grasp on the grammar and how to make sentences in Japanese. And would like to be speaking in Japanese, not necessarily well, but enough that I'm starting to be functional. I would really like to hit a B1 level after 6 months. That's with 1,000 words, decent grammar control. I think that a B1 is doable. And that way it leaves the entire rest of the year, the entire last 6 months, to go from B1 to B2. So one thing to understand about these European language levels is that each subsequent level gets much bigger in terms of the amount of information you have to cram into your head, the amount of vocabulary required. Like the leap from nothing to A1 is almost like non-existent. It's very small. A2 is again small, B1 a little bit bigger, and then B2 is a significant jump. So I want to have an entire 6 months to do that, because I'm going to need at least another 1,000 words and a much better grasp on the grammar to hit a B2. It might require even more. I mean, typically I've found in the past that if I know 2,000 high-frequency words and I have good command of the language, that I can function at a B2 level. Some things I've read have led me to believe I might need more words for Japanese, but it's also tricky in Japanese because how do you define a word? Japanese is a agglutinative language. It has nothing to do with wheat allergies, but it means that you, instead of conjugating a verb, like I am, you are, he is, you add suffixes to the end of things, which I know a little bit about because it's very similar to Turkish grammar, which is interesting. But you come down to this question of, does each little suffix count as a word, or is that just a part of the first word that's now been conjugated? So counting these words becomes tricky in the first place. But let's just say I'm going to aim to have a minimum of 2,000 words by the end of the year. And if I can get more, 3 or 4 or 5, then that would be awesome. But we'll see what time allows. I think that with 5,000 words, I would be very well covered in Japanese. I mean, something like 95% of everything that I hear I would understand. But after that, your returns really start diminishing, and diminishing quickly. So each next 1,000 words you learn is going to give you a 0.5%. If you're already at 95% and want to get up to 98, I mean, that's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of words, and really a lot of work. But you can get to right before that point in a much quicker period of time, because those first words, if you look at it as a curve of the yield of each word, the first words you learn they get you so much further, and beyond that the utility of each word approaches zero. So I'm not interested in perfecting Japanese and pursuing this for 10 years and I mean, if I finish the year and it goes well and I want to learn more, and say I want to say I hit B2 and then I want to go to a C1 level, I mean, I think it would take me easily another year to go from B2 to C1. I mean, because that's really a big jump, and anything after that, forget it. At least for me, my plan is to get to that point where the returns start diminishing. So I'm going to get the most of the high yield stuff at the beginning and then call it good. I've limited myself to 1 year. Let's see how much I can do in that time. And that's it. That's the plan. I'm sure that stuff is going to change as we go, but that's my best educated guess of what I plan on doing. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this adventure, because there are a lot of new aspects about Japanese that I haven't seen before. We have the writing system is kind of the big obvious one, but also the way that they phrase ideas is the order of words is all switched around and totally different from English, which I'm really fascinated by. And there's also a very interesting culture attached with Japan and the Japanese language. So I'm looking forward to diving into all that, and I'm ready to get to work, which is good because I've got a lot of it on my plate coming up. So thank you for watching. Please say hi in the comments and stuff. Let me know if you have questions, and I'll talk to you soon. I'll see you in January. Thank you again for watching and for your support, and I will see you in January.